Lights, camera, drama, a lavish wedding ceremony in a grand cathedral, a wealthy bridegroom pacing anxiously at the altar, and a mysterious bride hidden behind a flowing white veil. Onlookers whisper, did he really marry her just to cement a powerful merger? Rumors swirl about a deal worth millions and an astounding secret no one saw coming. The tension rises as he slowly lifts her veil, only to be confronted with a revelation that demolishes his carefully orchestrated plan. This is the scandalous story of a millionaire who thought money could buy anything, only to discover that sometimes the greatest fortune is found in the most unexpected place. Alexander Huxley was a man who believed he could orchestrate life like a business deal. As the CEO of Huxley Innovations, an emerging tech conglomerate that had clawed its way to the top of the Silicon Valley ladder, Alexander was used to calling the shots. He'd grown up in a modest suburb outside Los Angeles, raised by a single mother who often worked 2 or 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads. His father was the kind of man who drifted in and out of their lives, never offering support or stability. Seeing his mother's endless hustle fueled Alexander's obsession with security and success. By the time he turned 35, he'd amassed a fortune that most people could only dream of, and he'd done it through a cunning mixture of charm, ruthless negotiation, and an eye for risk that consistently paid off. However, Alexander's golden streak appeared threatened when rumors of an impending economic downturn spooked his board members and potential investors. Tech stocks were shaky, and the once unstoppable Huxley Innovations needed new capital and fast. Matthew Ridgway, the CFO, had outlined a detailed plan involving a merger with another heavyweight in the industry, the formidable Carlyle Technologies, run by the influential Carlyle family. It wasn't long before Alexander received the curious proposition that changed everything: to secure the merger through marriage. The Carlyles had a single daughter, Cassandra Carlyle, who was looking to settle down and, for reasons of her own, was willing to consider a deal that would unite 2 tech empires through a carefully arranged wedding. The very idea initially felt archaic to Alexander. Marriage for the sake of business alliances belonged to centuries past, or so he thought. But with Huxley Innovations on precarious ground, the proposal suddenly glistened like a lifeline. The Carlyles demanded a formal union that would solidify trust and guarantee collaboration, and they knew Alexander's reputation well. He was an aggressive deal-maker, but if he wanted to partner with them, if he wanted that critical injection of capital, he'd need to do it on their terms. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed. After all, he believed love was overrated, something that slowed people down. He was a practical man, convinced that feelings were far too messy to be worth the trouble. A business arrangement would be simple, clean, and strictly transactional. Or so he told himself. For reasons Alexander never fully understood, the Carlyles insisted that he meet Cassandra for the first time at the wedding. She had expressed her preference for an old-fashioned courtship, a concept that baffled Alexander in a modern world of dating apps and social media. He was told that Cassandra was shy, had spent considerable time abroad, and was uninterested in social gatherings. Her pictures were carefully guarded. There was an aura of secrecy around her, something that Alexander simply dismissed as eccentric. He rationalized that if the Carlyles saw fit to keep their daughter's identity under wraps, they had their reasons. And who was he to argue? He needed their partnership to salvage his company's future. Besides, Alexander had always been more drawn to the substance of a deal than to frills and sentimentality. He busied himself with contract details, prenuptial agreements, and cross-company synergy analyses. He orchestrated the wedding's financial aspects as meticulously as he would handle a merger. Patricia Whitman, a renowned wedding planner in Manhattan, was hired to create an opulent ceremony that would double as a statement to the entire tech industry, two empires joining forces in a spectacle of modern aristocracy. The venue was set at St. Germain's Cathedral in San Francisco, a Gothic masterpiece that towered over the city's skyline, its grandeur a fitting stage for the union of the Huxley and Carlyle names. As the ceremony date approached, Alexander was oddly calm. He'd negotiated countless multi-million-dollar contracts, stared down corporate adversaries, and emerged victorious. A wedding, especially one so carefully scripted, should have been a cakewalk. But on the morning of the big day, as he straightened his tailored midnight blue tuxedo, he felt an inexplicable flutter in his chest. He was about to marry a stranger. He consoled himself with the knowledge that once the veil was lifted, the real prize would be the formidable business alliance that could catapult Huxley Innovations to unprecedented heights. Romance, he believed, was just an optional add-on he neither wanted nor needed. The cathedral thrummed with anticipation. High arches and stained glass windows cast colorful mosaics across polished marble floors. Industry giants, venture capitalists, and media outlets had gathered for what some hailed as the tech wedding of the century. Everyone seemed to know the groom. Alexander Huxley's chiseled features and piercing blue eyes had graced countless magazine covers. The bride, however, remained an enigma. Although the Carlyles were an old money family with significant sway, they were notoriously private. Their sudden partnership with Alexander was the hottest rumor in Silicon Valley, sparking speculation about the bride's looks, her temperament, and most of all her motives. A hush fell as the organ music began. The heavy wooden doors at the far end of the cathedral swung open. A tall, graceful figure glided in, concealed by a heavy white veil that trailed behind her. Dressed in a stunning gown of satin and lace, she made her way down the aisle, each step measured and regal. Alexander turned to watch, heart pounding unexpectedly in his chest. Out of the corner of his eye, he noted the anxious expression of William Carlyle, Cassandra's father, and the stern composure of her mother, Victoria. It was then Alexander realized that the Carlyles, too, seemed uneasy about this union. Time seemed to slow as Cassandra reached his side. She didn't look up, keeping her gaze on the floor, her face hidden behind the veil's delicate embroidery. The officiant began the ceremony, weaving in formalities about partnership, unity, and mutual trust. Alexander tried to remind himself this was just another deal, but something about Cassandra's demeanor unsettled him. She barely spoke, uttering the required vows in a soft, trembling voice. Even so, he couldn't deny she possessed a quiet poise that was oddly captivating. Finally, the moment arrived. The officiant declared them husband and wife and gestured for Alexander to lift Cassandra's veil. He steeled himself, anticipating a standard reveal. Yet, as he gently lifted the lace and saw Cassandra's face, his jaw tightened and his breath caught in his throat. Cassandra Carlyle, for all the secrecy and dramatics, was breathtakingly beautiful, but not in the conventional, airbrushed sense. She had delicate features and mesmerizing dark eyes, but a jagged scar curved from her right temple toward her cheekbone, half hidden beneath expertly applied makeup. It was the kind of scar that told a story of survival or heartbreak. Instantly, the entire cathedral seemed to vanish for Alexander. He realized with an unpleasant jolt that she was not a stranger after all. He knew those eyes. He had met her before years ago, under circumstances he'd deliberately buried in his memory. Before he could speak, Cassandra's eyes flickered with recognition, and she averted her gaze. The crowd behind them, unaware of this private revelation, erupted into polite applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the newlyweds' first moments as husband and wife. Yet Alexander was momentarily paralyzed. The day he'd once thought would secure his business empire now felt like a ticking bomb. If Cassandra was who he thought she was, the entire premise of their marriage was built on a foundation of secrets, regrets, and possibly revenge. Long before Alexander had become a household name in tech, he was a scrappy up-and-comer with a fledgling startup. In those lean years, he had no time or patience for personal connections. But there had been one fleeting encounter at a workshop in London where he went to pitch his startup to a group of angel investors. The workshop was hosted at a co-working space run by a philanthropic group that provided resources to young entrepreneurs. During a networking lunch, he'd shared a table with a bright-eyed woman who pitched an idea for an eco-friendly packaging platform. She introduced herself as Cassandra Rowland, or so he recalled. He couldn't quite remember the last name. They had exchanged a few cordial words, discussing their hopes for their respective companies. He remembered her fervor and the way her expression lit up when she spoke about sustainability and corporate responsibility. However, in his single-minded pursuit of the big leagues, Alexander had dismissed her as a dreamer who would never make it. He'd even made a snide comment about how idealism and business rarely mix. The way her face fell, that flicker of pain, had lingered with him long after, but he'd been too busy chasing investors to dwell on it. Even when she'd tried to approach him later with potential collaboration, he'd brushed her off, telling her that profit margins came before saving the planet. Then he never spoke to her again. He hadn't known about the scar, then it must have come afterward. As he stood beside her now, Alexander's mind churned with possibilities. Did Cassandra remember him as that arrogant entrepreneur who belittled her vision? Why had she chosen to marry him under an assumed identity? Was this entire arrangement a coincidence, or was it a twisted form of payback? The wedding reception unfolded in grand style. An orchestra played classical pieces, Michelin-starred chefs served sumptuous food, and journalists vied for interviews. Yet Alexander felt strangely distanced from the extravagance. Cassandra, newly introduced as Mrs. Cassandra Huxley, was whisked away by well-wishers, leaving him little chance to speak to her privately. Throughout the evening, Alexander caught glimpses of her, a poised figure moving gracefully in the swirl of guests. He noticed the way she kept her scar partially concealed with her hair, as if practiced in drawing attention away from it. When they finally convened for the traditional first dance, Alexander felt the eyes of hundreds of guests settle upon them. Holding Cassandra's hand, he swallowed the lump in his throat. The waltz began, and they revolved slowly under the glittering chandeliers. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, each step brought them closer to a conversation neither seemed ready to have. He managed a polite smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you properly." Cassandra's lips pressed into a ghost of a smile. "I suppose it's only fair we do this dance, now that we're husband and wife." Her voice was steady, betraying no hint of the swirling tension between them. Alexander drew in a breath, struggling to maintain composure. You look beautiful. I didn't realize, when I agreed to this, I didn't expect that you'd met me once." She supplied quietly, finishing his sentence. "In London, at the workshop, it wasn't a question." He nodded mutely, 1,000 inquiries tumbling through his head. Before he could voice them, she spoke again, her tone resolute. "We will talk, but not tonight. This is our wedding reception. Eyes are on us." Then she offered him the faintest of smiles for the benefit of the crowd. Over the next few days, the newlyweds were caught in a whirlwind of post-wedding obligations. There were interviews, photo shoots, and endless congratulatory messages from prominent figures in tech and high society. Alexander had scheduled a honeymoon trip to the Caribbean, less out of romance and more to comply with social expectations. To the outside world, they were the perfect power couple, forging a union that promised to reshape the tech landscape. But behind the closed doors of their private jet, tension crackled in the air. Once the plane hit cruising altitude, Alexander sank into an upholstered seat across from Cassandra. The flight attendants politely withdrew, leaving them alone for the first time since the wedding. For a few moments, neither spoke. Alexander observed her, the delicacy of her fingers, the quiet confidence with which she held herself, and the subtle way she hid her scar behind soft waves of hair. "Cassandra," he began carefully, "it's clear we've met before. You remember me, and I remember you, though I know very little beyond that. I need to know why you agreed to this arrangement. What do you want from me?" Cassandra met his gaze, her brown eyes unreadable. "I was surprised when my parents first approached me about the marriage, but the real shock came when they said your name. At first, I intended to refuse, but then I remembered that workshop in London. I remembered your dismissiveness, your belief that the only thing that mattered was profit. It haunted me." She paused, her hand instinctively touching the scar on her face. "Things happened after that workshop, things that changed my life forever. I chose to marry you because I believed there was more to you than just the ruthless millionaire. And I had reasons of my own to hide my identity until we were at the altar." Alexander frowned. "If this is about payback—" "No," she said firmly, "not payback. But I needed to ensure that if we partnered our companies, if we tied our futures, I wouldn't be overshadowed by your ambitions. I didn't want to come to you as the starry-eyed girl you ignored years ago. I wanted to stand on equal footing, with the Carlyle name and resources behind me." The conversation raised more questions than it answered, and Alexander realized they were just beginning an intricate dance of motives, secrets, and possibilities. The Caribbean island they visited was a paradise of pristine beaches and turquoise waters, but Alexander felt strangely restless. Usually, he found mental reprieve in exotic locations, a respite from the corporate grind. However, the knowledge that his marriage was balanced on shifting sands of half-revealed truths kept him perpetually on edge. Their interactions ranged from polite small talk to tense standoffs, neither fully prepared to expose the vulnerability that lay beneath their union. One evening, after a lavish dinner at their private villa, Alexander asked Cassandra about the scar. He tried to be gentle, but he sensed her reluctance. She ran her fingertips along its edges, recalling the night of a violent accident in rural France, where she'd been volunteering with an environmental outreach project. A car crash had ended in tragedy for one of her close friends. Cassandra had survived, but bore the physical and emotional wounds as a reminder of life's fragility. Alexander felt a strange pang of remorse. While he'd been scaling the corporate ladder, preoccupied with profit and prestige, Cassandra had been overseas, living by her ideals, putting her intellect and resources into humanitarian projects. The conversation forced him to confront the difference between them. Despite her heartbreak and the scar that came with it, Cassandra's quiet determination to build something meaningful had never wavered. "Did that experience change you?" he asked softly. She gave him a long, thoughtful look. "Yes, it taught me that life is too precious to waste on empty pursuits, but ironically, it also taught me the importance of financial independence, of having the means to make a difference on a larger scale. That's why I returned to my parents, took on the Carlyle name, and used our influence to build eco-friendly ventures. I never forgot my startup dream, though, the one you found so frivolous." Alexander didn't know how to respond. Until now, he'd always seen everything through the lens of a balance sheet. Hearing Cassandra speak with such conviction about purpose and meaning stirred an unfamiliar feeling in him. Guilt, admiration, he couldn't quite place it. She was reminding him of something he'd lost in his ruthless climb to the top. When the honeymoon ended and they returned to the real world, both Alexander and Cassandra found themselves enveloped by corporate demands. The official announcement of the Huxley-Carlyle merger garnered massive media coverage. Overnight, the couple became the embodiment of a new era in tech, one that merged innovation with sustainability. Cassandra took on a public role advocating for eco-conscious initiatives, while Alexander continued to champion cutting-edge technologies. The synergy was promising. Stock prices soared, and investors flocked to their joint ventures. Despite their public success, their private relationship remained fraught with uncertainty. Both lived in Alexander's sleek penthouse, an architectural marvel of glass and steel overlooking San Francisco Bay. The space felt cold and impersonal to Cassandra, who would have preferred a home with more warmth. Alexander, so used to solitude and discipline, struggled to adapt to sharing his life with someone so passionate and independent. They danced around each other in the penthouse's long corridors and high-ceilinged living areas, often exchanging polite words, but rarely delving deeper than necessary. Occasionally, Alexander would glimpse Cassandra in her study, poring over proposals for environmental grants or presenting new outreach programs. He was intrigued by her focus, how she spent hours on philanthropic work. Sometimes he wanted to join her to see how her mind worked, but he always felt like an intruder, uncertain of his welcome. Cassandra, for her part, seemed to be waiting for something for Alexander to demonstrate he could be more than an opportunistic businessman. She saw flashes of empathy in him, especially when he spoke about his mother, who'd worked so hard to provide for him. Yet he always retreated behind a wall of pragmatism, as though he were afraid to admit that there might be more to life than mergers and quarterly earnings. Rumors about the nature of their union simmered in the press. Some blogs suggested Cassandra had blackmailed Alexander into marriage. Others speculated Alexander had coerced Cassandra to secure a controlling interest in Carlyle Technologies. Then came the rumor that rattled both families. An anonymous source hinted that the bride and groom had known each other before. Tabloids seized on the possibility of a hidden romance or a scandalous betrayal. William Carlyle summoned the couple to his imposing mansion on the outskirts of the city. The old patriarch, who had always been protective of his daughter, questioned Alexander sternly in his study, a room brimming with antique leather-bound books and relics from the family's storied past. "Alexander, what is this I hear about you two having a prior history?" William asked, his gaze unyielding. "Cassandra told me nothing of this when I suggested the marriage." "I don't appreciate secrets that could jeopardize our family's business or reputations." Alexander, feeling pinned by the older man's stare, glanced at Cassandra, who nodded for him to speak. "Sir, it's true that Cassandra and I met briefly years ago in London. I was a struggling entrepreneur then, focused on launching my company. We were not close. It was a brief exchange, and I didn't treat her kindly." The admission tasted bitter on his tongue. William's expression darkened. "Does this prior encounter create any danger for our alliance? Are there unresolved issues that might harm our partnership?" His voice carried the weight of a man who'd spent decades securing his family's legacy. Cassandra stepped forward. "Father, our history changes nothing about the business arrangement. If anything, it underscores the fact that I understand who Alexander was and who he can be. I want this union to succeed, not just for business, but because I believe we can accomplish real good with our combined resources." William eyed his daughter carefully, then nodded. "Very well. But I won't tolerate scandals. We've come too far for that." His warning hung in the air as the meeting concluded at 11. In the following weeks, Alexander found himself gravitating toward Cassandra's philanthropic efforts. Intrigued by her unwavering determination, he made time to review some of her proposals. One evening, he ventured into her study, a spacious room lined with books on ecology, climate change, and social enterprise. "I'd like to see what you're working on," he offered, trying to keep his tone casual. Cassandra, initially surprised, gestured for him to come closer. She showed him drafts for a sustainability program that would leverage Huxley Innovations' technological prowess to reduce carbon footprints in manufacturing. Alexander found himself genuinely interested, asking probing questions about logistics and feasibility. As they delved into the details, a comfortable silence enveloped them, a shared focus, replacing the customary walls they erected around each other. Hours passed, and they forgot about dinner. Eventually, Cassandra realized the time. She stretched, exhaustion evident in her eyes, but a small smile played on her lips. "Thank you for caring enough to look at this," she said softly. "It means a lot that you see value in it." Alexander looked down at the documents, feeling a rush of unfamiliar warmth. "I never really gave sustainability a chance before. I was so wrapped up in growth and profits. But now, I see how it can be integrated to benefit everyone. That's good business too." It was a small moment, but a significant shift in their dynamic. They weren't just business allies or reluctant spouses anymore. They were collaborators, perhaps even partners in a more profound sense. For the first time since their wedding, Alexander felt a spark of genuine connection with Cassandra. 12. However, harmony proved short-lived. An unexpected crisis struck Huxley Innovations. A lawsuit alleging that one of their newly acquired subsidiaries was involved in patent infringement. Compounding this, key investors grew skittish about the negative press, leading to a drop in stock value. Meetings erupted into chaos. Alexander found himself spending late nights in tense conference calls and crisis management sessions. Under enormous stress, Alexander began reverting to old habits, shutting out everything but the problem at hand. He cancelled dinners with Cassandra, skipped philanthropic events she'd invited him to, and locked himself in his office for days on end. The precarious balancing act between their personal and professional lives started to crumble. Cassandra watched as he pulled away, disheartened by his single-minded obsession with salvaging the company's image. She tried to reach out, offering solutions that incorporated transparency and ethical responsibility. But Alexander, feeling cornered, lashed out. One evening, after a grueling round of legal briefings, Cassandra found him in the penthouse study. "I've drafted a statement taking responsibility for the subsidiary's actions," she said. "We should apologize publicly and commit to rectifying the situation." Alexander bristled. "You want me to admit guilt? That's corporate suicide. We'll lose even more investors." She crossed her arms. "We made a mistake, acquiring that subsidiary without thorough due diligence. Our best move is to show accountability." He erupted, pounding his fist on the desk. "That might be your idealistic approach, but we're dealing with billions on the line. We can't just apologize and hope the world forgives us." Cassandra's eyes flashed. "So you'd rather lie? Cover it up to save face?" A tense silence followed. Finally, Alexander turned away, his voice cold. "You do what you want on your philanthropic platforms. Let me handle the business. After all, that's what I'm good at, right?" Hurt and outraged, Cassandra left without another word. She retreated to her old bedroom at her parents' estate for a few nights, leaving Alexander to wrestle with the crisis alone. 13. Amid this turmoil, a twist none of them saw coming arrived in the form of another powerful tech magnate, Jonathan Escoffier, who'd been eyeing a hostile takeover of Carlyle Technologies. With the Huxley-Carlyle merger in a fragile state, Escoffier swooped in, offering William Carlyle an attractive deal to sell a controlling interest in his company, effectively dismantling the new partnership before it truly took flight. Frantic, Cassandra rushed to her father. "You can't sell to Escoffier. Our agreement with Alexander is still in place. If you break it, it'll unravel everything we've built, everything I've been working toward." William sighed heavily. I'm not inclined to sell, but Escoffier's offer is almost too good to refuse. The Huxley-Carlyle merger is jeopardized by that lawsuit, and your husband's approach to it has shaken my confidence. Investors are pressing me to consider all options. Devastated, Cassandra realized that her father wasn't making an idle threat. The Carlyle board was seriously entertaining Escoffier's proposal. If they accepted, Alexander would lose the partnership he so desperately needed. Huxley Innovations could face catastrophic losses, and Cassandra's environmental initiatives, so closely tied to Huxley's resources, would stall. The entire marriage, founded on a shaky business arrangement, could implode. In desperation, Cassandra tried to reach Alexander, but he was too embroiled in the legal fight to pick up her calls. Emails went unanswered. She felt a stab of betrayal. After all they'd shared, was he truly going to shut her out now, when everything was on the brink of collapse? A part of her was tempted to walk away and let the chips fall where they might. She wasn't sure if Alexander even cared about her beyond the business arrangement. Yet she recalled the nights they'd spent discussing sustainability programs, the way his eyes lit up when they found a solution that benefited both profit and planet. Beneath his tough exterior, there was a man whose heart still beat for more than just the bottom line. She wasn't prepared to give up on him yet. Determined, Cassandra marched into the towering Huxley Innovations headquarters. Even the frantic staff paused to watch her pass. Though she was the CEO's wife, her arrival in the midst of chaos drew curious stares. She made her way to Alexander's office, ignoring the frantic attempt of his assistant to block her entry. Inside, Alexander was perched on the edge of his desk, phone pressed to his ear, voice raspy from hours of tense conversation. When he saw Cassandra, he motioned for a minute, finished the call, and turned to her, expression guarded. "Cassandra," he said curtly, "I'm in the middle of dealing with this lawsuit." "I know," she replied, setting her jaw, "and it's about to get worse. Escoffier made a bid to buy out Carlyle. My father is considering it. If that happens, everything we built the merger, our projects will be destroyed." He ran a hand through his hair, stress evident in the tightness around his eyes. "Your father wouldn't do that. It would ruin our arrangement." She stepped closer. "He might. He's losing faith in you, in us. I came here because I believe we can still fix this, but you have to be willing to change your approach." Alexander glanced away, struggling with the weight of his pride. "And if I don't?" Cassandra's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and concern. "Then we lose everything, Alexander. And maybe we lose each other too." A heavy silence fell. Alexander realized that for once, this wasn't about dominating the game or outsmarting an opponent. It was about trust. Trust in his partner and his wife. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll handle this together." Alexander called for an emergency meeting with his legal team and top executives. Cassandra joined him, surprising everyone who expected her role to be merely symbolic. To Alexander's own astonishment, he found her counsel invaluable. She argued for a balanced strategy, own up to the subsidiaries' mistakes, pledge to correct them, and demonstrate a commitment to ethical business practices moving forward. The legal team balked at first, terrified of lawsuits, but Alexander backed his wife's proposal. Next, Alexander and Cassandra drafted a joint statement for the media, explaining the steps they'd take to remedy the infringement. They pledged a fund to support smaller innovators who might have been hurt by the subsidiaries' actions, promising a new standard of responsibility in the tech world. The announcement sparked heated debates on social media. Some labeled it a publicity stunt, but others applauded the transparency. Crucially, William Carlyle and his board saw a spark of integrity that reaffirmed their faith in the merger. The hostile takeover threat began to recede as Escoffier realized the combined forces of Huxley-Carlyle were stronger than he'd anticipated. In the midst of high-stakes negotiations, Alexander and Cassandra stood side by side at a press conference. As cameras flashed, Alexander found himself reaching for Cassandra's hand. She squeezed it in solidarity. For the first time, they weren't merely two people forced into a marriage of convenience. They were partners, collaborators in something bigger than themselves. Later that night, in the privacy of their penthouse, Alexander turned to Cassandra with an earnestness that caught her off guard. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thick with emotion, "for shutting you out, for not believing in your methods, for forgetting that there's more to business and life than profit. I'm also sorry for how I treated you back in London. I was arrogant. I see that now." Cassandra's eyes softened. She touched his cheek gently, her scar partially visible under the low light. "I believe in second chances, Alexander. If I didn't, I'd never have said I do." 16. In the aftermath of the crisis, Huxley Innovations and Carlyle Technologies not only survived, but emerged stronger. Their transparent approach to conflict resolution won back investor confidence. Cassandra's sustainability initiatives gained traction, inspiring other companies to adopt socially and environmentally responsible practices. Media outlets praise this fresh direction, dubbing it the green tech revolution. For Alexander and Cassandra, the merger was no longer just a business arrangement. It had become a mission to prove that financial success and social responsibility could coexist. Their marriage, once a facade, evolved into a genuine bond built on mutual respect and a shared vision. One evening, as they strolled through a small garden, Cassandra had convinced Alexander to install on the penthouse terrace. He stopped to admire the flowers blooming under the city lights. He turned to Cassandra, a reflective smile on his face. "You know, I used to think marriage was just a contract, a means to secure a deal," he said softly. "But today, when I watched you speak at that conference about forging a better future, I realized something. The best partnerships aren't defined by profit. They're defined by trust, empathy, and a willingness to grow together." Cassandra threaded her arm through his. "It's taken us a tumultuous journey to discover that." He nodded, pulling her closer. The night air carried a gentle breeze, rustling the leaves around them. Alexander brushed aside a lock of her hair to see her scar more clearly, placing a tender kiss on it. "I'm sorry for all the judgments I made. When I lifted your veil that day, I thought I'd found a stranger with a secret. But I was the one with the bigger secret. I never knew what real commitment was until I nearly lost it." Cassandra leaned her head on his shoulder. "Well, you've found it now." In that tranquil, starlit moment, they stood together overlooking the glittering skyline, two souls who'd discovered that sometimes the greatest fortune is forged not in the boardroom, but in the fragile, powerful alchemy of hearts bound by hope and resilience. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. Alexander and Cassandra's story shows how pride can be humbled by truth, and how even a marriage born out of business convenience can blossom into a genuine partnership if only we dare to look beyond our preconceived notions. They remind us that in life, people can surprise us, especially when we expect the least. If you found yourself rooting for them, celebrating their triumphs, and agonizing over their setbacks, then please show your support. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, do hit the like button, share it with your friends who crave a good twist, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories just like this. Each like, share, and subscription helps us continue bringing you the best real-life drama fiction. So go ahead, spread the word, and stay tuned for more heart-stopping tales.